Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be covering the new album from Clipping, titled Clipping. Well, actually not titled that, it's unpronounceable because they took out the vowels. Now, I knew this day would come eventually. I knew that as soon as I started covering hip-hop, and especially after I really quite liked the most recent release from Rat King, I'd eventually have to dive into the noisy, eclectic, and infamously inaccessible subgenre of noise hop. A very new genre, one inspired by the experimental fusion between noise rock and hardcore gangster rap. It was a genre I was always somewhat tentative to approach, because let's face it, while I do listen to some experimental and abrasive music, I do like some of the trappings of conventionality, or at least recognizable song structures and melodies. And while I really did love Swan's most recent record, I also know that I only really came to embrace the band in full when they started incorporating more melodic progressions into their music. And given that I wasn't really a huge fan of what I heard from the output of acts like, say, Death Grips, I was a little bit uneasy about looking up an act like Clipping, given their reputation. So I took a look at their first album, Mid-City, and, well, if I was looking for the perfect transitional act between traditional hardcore gangster rap and the paranoid, noisy insanity of Death Grips, it'd be Clipping. And yeah, I really like it. The bizarre thing about Clipping is that once you get past the explosively jagged noise, there are undercurrents of real melody and depth to these mixes, and Daveed Diggs is a damn impressive spitter, although not the traditional sort of visceral MC that comes with this sort of experimental music. Now, my issues with the act were issues of content and the MC himself. Well, I definitely like Diggs' flow and lyrical construction, and I definitely appreciate the moments where he seemed to be showing the unstable anarchy and bloody emptiness lurking beneath the trappings of gangster rap. There were moments that his flow got a little bit less intense, and his punchlines got, for lack of a better word, a little bit corny. And no, look, for the most part, however, it was noise rock that I really surprisingly liked. And when I heard that they had signed to Sub Pop Records, I was curious to see what would come out of it. Would they attempt even more mainstream accessibility to the extent that any sort of noise rap is accessible, or they just double down on the weirdness? So what's up with this album? Well, to some extent, I think they did both, because Clipping delivers a record that takes the ideas rooted in Mid-City and intensifies them into a visceral yet somewhat surprisingly accessible release. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I really enjoyed large parts of this album on multiple levels. But at the same time, I'm not quite sure it holds together as tightly as it could have when examined a little bit more closely. And while I really do like this album a lot, and I'll easily recommend it, I also see a fair bit of unrealized potential on this record that could have been crafting into something with even more emotional presence and power. So you know what, let's start with Daveed Diggs himself, who continues to spit with a lot of intensity, variety in his flows, and a fair amount of charisma. With a more accessible instrumentation, Diggs sounds more comfortable than ever over these beats, and he's easily able to imitate the flows of rappers that he's either mocking or satirizing. Now, granted, I don't always think that's a good thing, because on songs like Work Work, Tonight, and Dominoes, he's imitating a very staccato kind of flow that I've never really found all that flattering or interesting, especially considering that Diggs can spit with a lot of energy and passion, and that kind of flow tends to neuter that. Now, granted, he's got a valid reason for using these particular flows, and on most of these tracks he drops into his traditional method of spitting pretty quickly, but it's still that staccato style's not a flow of which I'm all that fond of. And yeah, I know that's nitpicking, because for the most part, I really like Diggs on these beats, although I can't really say the same for his guest rappers. Now, don't get me wrong, none of these features are altogether bad, with King T fitting the best and Juice's verse being at least the least interesting to me, but to some extent, none of them really blow me away, or in terms of their creativity, or do anything beyond exactly their necessary role on these songs. Take Coke Pistol Cree on Work Work, or Gangsta Boo on Tonight. They play the love interest in these songs, and while they fit the context and nuance of these tracks, I wasn't exactly blown away by either of their features. They were good, they just didn't shock me all that much. Now, fortunately, the instrumentation does a lot in terms of step up in terms of creativity and the sound, taking some of the more of the fuzz-saturated lo-fi sounds of Mid-City and sharpening the abrasion to something much more tight and cohesive. And it's really here where the production just shines. at taking the clattering percussion, adding loads of depth and texture to it, giving all the beats real presence in the mix, and somehow managing to create real melodies behind all these sounds. Take the song Body and Blood, with the echoing percussion, the splashing effects, and the thin scratchiness in the mix. It's easily one of the most propulsive, and with the power drill sounds in the song, one of the most industrial hip-hop songs on the album, and an easy favorite for me. And then take Taking Off, which is pretty minimalist as Diggs kicks his flow into double and triple time, and then out of nowhere it's punctuated by this saxophone interlude that provides real haunted depth to the song. I really liked it. Or take Tonight, which has this shimmering synth line that wouldn't sound out of place on a DJ Mustard track, but the edges of that song creak and crackle and makes it a lot more interesting than just your standard club banger. Hell, Get Up takes the insufferably grating sound of an alarm clock and manages to shift its tone and subtly tweak its depth to make it actually interesting and honestly one of the better hooks on the album. But you know what, if I were looking for instrumentation on this record that I love the most, that's tough. Might be a toss-up between Body and Blood, Story 2, which might have one of the best slow and perfectly modulated crescendos in the synth lines that I've heard thus far this year, and then Dominoes, which has this jerking, wobbly riff for the verses that seems to be on the verge of constant breakdown, but then the chorus comes in with this great lo-fi piano melody and a children's choir for the hook that actually manages to rise above my usual version of that sort of cheap, crass emotional manipulation. I really dug the melody here. Now, granted, part of this has to do with the lyrics and themes of this album, which are the other huge selling point. The lyrics are vivid, colorful, and incredibly descriptive, with a beautiful amount of flow and meter, and honestly, the delivery is worth the album price alone. But as I said, many of these themes are extensions to those already found in Mid-City, taking traditional mainstream gangster rap and subverting those trappings and exposing the real darkness underneath them with gleeful abandon. In terms of the darkness of the sound and the aim of skewering mainstream hip-hop, Clipping actually shares a fair bit in common with the most recent album from The Roots, And Then You Shoot Your Cousin. But there's absolutely zero morals in Clipping's presentation, just sick amusement of it all. Body and Blood, for instance, is a ruthless inversion of traditionally male-dominated horrorcore cliches by presenting a female protagonist, so much to the point, you know what, if Nicki Minaj ever managed to get her shit together, I'd love to hear her remix herself onto this track. She'd probably be a pretty damn good fit. Or take Tonight, which takes the traditional club hookup track and reveals the sleazy undercurrent to it and actually makes it kind of work. Or take Story 2, another narrative track that focuses on a former serial arsonist that comes to see karmic backlash as his house burns and his family dies. Or take Dominoes, a song that might begin as framing the main character as a successful gangsta, but then the third verse flashes back to a schoolyard fight to reveal how very little has changed since the schoolyard to the mainstream gangsta scene, just age and the scale of it all. All four of these songs show facets of the underlying theme of this record, which is the revelation of the dark and twisted underbelly that still resides in mainstream hip-hop. Frame it properly with all the consequences, and then dives all back into it anyway, because in their minds, the trap, it's still a trap, so you might as well get something out of it. And the underlying sense of futility is underscored in song after song. Work has the narrator getting pulled over in the final verse and him running through his potential options in the song, but also with the acknowledgement that none of them will help him escape in the end, and he's still probably going to end up getting marginalized because of it. Summertime takes the traditional summer party jam and exposes the fact that the same gangster rap violence is happening in the same songs, and that these raps are endorsing a lot of the same violence, even during the summer when it's supposed to just be party season. Dream might be the slowest, most willfully abstract song on this album, but it shows how most people are willing to get caught up in the fantasy of gangsta and luxury rap when they don't see any way out. You can't really take that away from them. And then there's Ends, which must be the most direct assault on gangster rap cliches yet, attacking the hollow luxury, the hypocrisy, and the underlying insecurity and the hyper-masculinity of it all. How they aren't allowed to feel, they have to just be brash and spit. This is powerful, big idea stuff, and I only wish the songwriting had gone for broke more often tackling this sort of material. For me, it makes songs like the depiction of the shootout in Inside Out, or the gangsta swagger in Work and Or Die or Summertime, they just come across as occasionally a little bit simplistic. Still, solid enough tunes, let me stress this, and the wordplay and flow are so good and they redeem them, and Diggs is such a good storyteller and a creative poet that I wish he honestly pushed himself a little bit harder in this direction. Or let's put it like this. If you wanted to create an entire album full of his little story tracks, the first which you put on Mid-City and the second being here, with the same intensity and nuance and detail, he managed, like, shut up and take my money. I'd buy that in a heartbeat. But you know what? As it is, this might be one of the most creative and yet depraved hip-hop albums you will hear this year, and easily one of the best. Sure, it's nihilistic as all hell, but it manages to switch up the flow and sound and wordplay to manage to constantly keep things interesting. It manages to produce a lot of solid, catchy, melody-driven hooks along the way. This is a natural fit for the sound I like to see in noise rap. I won't say it's perfect. Some of the more straightforward gangsta songs didn't really grip me in the same way, but for what this album is, Clipping made some really twisted music on this record, and I surprisingly really ended up enjoying it. For me, it's an easy 8 out of 10 and a definite recommendation, especially if you're a fan of experimental hip-hop. You know what, hell, even if you're not, you should also give Clipping a major chance and pick up this album. You'll probably be surprised by what you get, and you'll probably be surprised by how much you end up enjoying it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or there's any other albums coming out that you'd like me to take a listen to, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. So until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse. I'll see you next time.